be sharing this launch event for a new Demos report published today in partnership with SEGRO, powering the Superpower. You're going to hear plenty more about that from our panellists this evening. What are we talking about tonight? I think our politicians have finally woken up to the economic malaise facing the country. Jeremy Hunt last week in the autumn statement setting out his so-called long-term plans for economic growth. Keir yesterday at the Resolution Foundation conference talking about the centrality of getting growth up to all of those plans and how that's the bedrock for anything that a Labour government will do. Science and technology are obviously really important to this. You have the Labour Party's industrial strategy putting a lot of emphasis on digital technology. From the government side, you hear a lot of talk about how Britain is going to become a science superpower by 2030. That all sounds great, but I think the problem is these are just plans today. The reality remains some way off, and that's essentially what we're going to be looking at today. I'm really delighted to be joined by an excellent panel. To my left, Sarah Jones, MP. Sarah is the Shadow Minister for Business and Industry. And to her left, Bill Esterson, MP, is the Shadow Minister for Roads. To Bill's left is Andrew O'Brien, Director of Policy and Impact at Demos. And to Andrew's left is James Craddock, who's the Managing Director of SEGRO. So a great panel for tonight's discussion, and thanks to everyone for coming along. Bit of housekeeping, we're going to run until 7 PM, so just under an hour. Do stay for a drink afterwards if you fancy. Fire exit to the right, and I think some of our panelists with parliamentary constraints may have to run off a little early. We're very grateful for the time you'll give us. So we're going to start with James. Do you just want to give me a bit of an overview of SEGRO's business and why you've worked with Demos on this paper today?
Perfect, thanks Ben. Good evening everyone, great to be here. So I might be about to introduce one of the largest companies you've never heard of, and I'm also about to introduce a sector that has had actually remarkably little airtime given what we see as the importance that it delivers to the UK economy. In turn first, just a little bit on SEGRO. So we are actually the UK's largest property company and developer of industrial logistics and warehouse space. If you put that into numbers, we're about 21 billion of assets under management, and we're based in the UK, but we also have activities across continental Europe, so in 7 countries there. And I think that what makes us an interesting business is that we are an enabler for other businesses. So we have over 1,400 customers across the SEGRO group, of which 700 are in the UK. And these range from small startup firms right the way through to large multinational corporations. But I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. Another important thing with that is we develop both small warehouses right the way through to large national distribution centres. So we've got a really good overview of the broader market. And finally on us as a business is that we are a long-term investor. So we've been around for over 100 years, all started with the Slough Trading Estate, which we developed and which we're still proud to own and manage today. The other aspect for us is it's not just about our customers. As a long-term investor, it's really important that we help the communities where we develop to thrive as well, because that's an important part of what we try to do. So that's SEGRO. Turning now to the industrial sector as a whole. For those of us that work in the sector day to day, we get quite excited about it, and the reason we get quite excited about it is because we just see how important it is as an integral part of the UK's supply chain. This is all about the movement of goods. It's about movement of goods and data, and this is about getting those goods, data and services to the parts of the country that are needed, so communities, consumers, but also businesses right the way across the UK. And probably the point at which it became, I think the sector became more aware in terms of people's public conscience was around COVID time, when people were absolutely reliant on the sector for the movement of goods and for the delivery of vital household products, whether it was medicines, whether it was food, etc., but also the data centre sector as well, supporting this sudden move from people working in an office environment to working from home, so that the digital infrastructure was critically important. The other piece as well is I think it was the first time that for people who worked in the sector, they felt extremely proud of the contribution they were making to the UK. So they were held up as key workers alongside doctors, paramedics, social workers. So they were making a really valuable contribution to the UK during what was a very, very difficult period. The other aspect of COVID is it changed our sector. We saw unprecedented growth in the digital economy and in e-commerce. So 2 really big booming boom sectors for us. And even now in a post-pandemic world, we see about 40% of workers working either in a hybrid or an at-home work environment. So again, the importance of that digital infrastructure can't be underestimated. The other piece is about supply chain resilience. What the pandemic taught us is we need to have resilience in our supply chains. This can deal with global pandemics, it can deal with global geopolitical shocks. So it's very important that we have that resilience. And I think we're seeing a bit of a trend towards a bit of nearshoring, where so we take the point of production closer to the point of consumption. So again, that builds some resilience into our UK supply chains. If we turn to our customer base, what's interesting about SEGRO is we have an incredibly broad range of customers, and this is also what we see in the broader sector as a whole. We've got customers, high street clothing, food retailers, online businesses, filmmakers, high-tech manufacturing, engineering firms, post and parcel. So there's a huge number of sectors, and that's just naming a few. But the one thing they all have in common is this need to have the highest quality, sustainable, and the best located warehousing for their operation. Because ultimately they're trying to service the needs of their own customer base as well. And then when you delve even more deeply into the sectors, we've got a roster of fantastic companies in our portfolio. So the likes of Netflix. So not all content is produced in Hollywood. A lot is produced up at SEGRO Park Enfield in North London, which most people wouldn't expect. We've got Mars bars still being made on the Slough trading estate. Customers like John Lewis, Brompton Bikes, Ocado, who are at the forefront of technical innovation in the retail sector, British Airways, Sainsbury's, Amazon, and Royal Mail. But we also have customers that I think fall under the radar. I would class as sort of our hidden economy. So customers that do things you just don't almost even think need to be done. So on the trading estate, we have a customer called John Crane, and they make seals for propeller shafts. And who would have thought you need that? But there are over 100 people employed there who are providing a vital support to that industry. And likewise in the data center sector as well. So we have a company called Equinix on the trading estate and beyond, and they've invested over £1 billion in the UK's digital infrastructure and really responsible in ensuring that part of our economy keeps running. So given all of that customer base and the importance of the sector, this is why we wanted to commission with Demos this report, because clearly, as you can see, the sector is going through a significant change as companies adapt to digital, they adapt to AI, they adapt to the growth of e-commerce, and customers are demanding all the time more smart and more sustainable buildings. So what does that mean in terms of the built environment? It means that we're trying to build better buildings. So from an embodied carbon perspective, we're trying to innovate with better building materials to reduce that embodied carbon in terms of construction. In terms of carbon in operation, we're putting solar panels on roofs, EV charging, battery technology. And again, this is all about reducing that embodied carbon and ultimately reducing costs to occupiers as well. So I think any government that wants to see their country become a technology superpower really needs to take a close look at the industrial and logistics sector. What I like in the report is this concept of the UK being an innovator nation. We see that time and time again. I would pick out AI and I pick out life sciences. These are things that we do better than anyone else from an innovation perspective. But it's one thing having the innovation, but it's another thing having the infrastructure to support that innovation. So the UK can be best placed to capitalise on what we already have, which is a really good starting point from an innovation standpoint. So what does that mean in terms of the policy environment? What do we need to see to unlock investment in the industrial sector? Well, there's three things I want to touch on this evening. Firstly is the planning system, which again the report refers to. The planning system needs to recognise the critical contribution of our sector to the technology economy. In terms of policy, we need to ensure we have sufficient land in the right places to enable those requirements from a logistics industrial standpoint to thrive. And importantly, we think is to have a national planning policy. So actually things are considered more strategically. These are significant bits of infrastructure for the UK. So rather than looking at it locally, let's consider this nationally. And finally, ensure there are responsive policy mechanisms to ensure that we have the future land supply to enable us to deliver the supply that we need to meet societal need going forward as well. Secondly, energy, and we'll probably keep coming back to that as a point this evening. This is critical. If the UK wants to thrive in this area, we need secure, reliable, and ultimately affordable green energy, which again will help the UK position itself towards its net zero targets. But what we do see, both from us as business, but also from our customers, is the delays in grid connections are creating a real hampering to investment in the sector. So we see as that's something that really needs to be addressed. And finally, it's about skills and about jobs. This sector employs over 3 million people in the UK, so it's a big employer. And what we need to ensure is that people are aware of the fantastic range and diversity of jobs that this sector employs. We're trying to do our bit in this. We're working with some of our customers, and we fund a joint industry DFT campaign called Generation Logistics, all about inspiring people to understand what is available and what this fantastic sector can deliver in terms of opportunities for them. So in conclusion, we see our sector as playing a really important role in the economy. Our customers are innovating, they're doing all sorts of fantastic things, as you see from the ones that I've outlined today, but we must provide them with the right space for both their current and their future needs. And again, I think that will maintain the competitiveness of the UK in a globalised economy. So clearly we can't do this alone, so this is why we wanted to do this today and launch this report. We want to work with government, partner with government to ensure that this provides the evidence and the opportunity to hopefully make a difference going forward for this sector. That's everything I had to say.
Thank you, James. That was great. Andrew, do you want to set out a bit more on the report and what we found?
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm Andrew O'Brien, I'm Director of Policy at Demos. And when SEGRO got in contact with us about doing some work in this area, my dad actually works at the Parkwell Estates, which is one of your trading areas. So I thought, well, I have to do the report then. So finally, so my dad can realise, there's actually tangible work and policy in this area. But no, in seriousness, I think, as Ben alluded to at the beginning, we hear a lot from government about how we want the UK, as James says, to be a kind of innovating nation at the forefront of productivity and growth in the future. But critical to that is the enabling infrastructure to have that happen. I think a lot of policymakers think of AI revolution and technology revolution just being men in white coats or women in white coats working in these super laboratories in Cambridge or whatever, and they innovate these products and suddenly the kind of whole market transforms. But I think if you look back at how we've historically technologically transitioned, that's not how it works. So, the great mystery about the UK is we had the first industrial revolution in this country, but we didn't have the second, we didn't have the third. We lagged behind that. And why did we do that? Because we built our infrastructure for steam power, and then the electricity revolution happened, and our buildings weren't fit for that. And it took us a while, it took us 30, 40, 50 years to catch up with the rest of the world. Similarly, we went through an information technology revolution. And the UK has been a leader of that, but it's partly been because financial services is one of those areas where they have adapted their building space and their infrastructure space to take advantage of that. So technology and infrastructure, the critical link that has, I think policymakers always recognise that. We've tried to focus on the kind of shiny, flashy end and ChatGPT bots and all that stuff that's going on there, but ultimately what will transform the growth prospects of the UK economy will be the ability of the 6 million businesses we have in the UK to implement those changes in their business. And to do that, they need space. They need the right space. They need it catered towards the latest technological innovations. They need the power, which James mentioned. They need also access to the transportation system. We're still going to have tangible physical products in this world. They might be made by 3D printing. They might be made with the support of AI. But they'll still need to be transported. They'll still need to be stored. We'll still need to have all that storage space. So what we're trying to get through into this report, if you want the UK to be a technological and scientific superpower, which I think we all do, we need to make sure our infrastructure is fit for that technological and scientific revolution. And I think what we found in this research is we have some fantastic strengths. We do have a very strong sector, as James mentioned, but there is more that we could be doing. And this isn't just a theoretical risk either. I mean, part of what makes Demos unique is we do a lot of engagement with the public. And for this particular one, because it was focused on business, we spoke to business leaders, both in partnership with SEGRO, workshopping with some of their clients, but also we surveyed over 500 businesses. And worryingly, about 15% of them told us they don't think they have the right space and facilities they need. So that means they're not hiring as many people. They're not investing in new technology because they don't think they have the facilities to make the most of those. So this isn't just think tankers in an ivory tower going, oh, this is a problem. We've actually spoken to businesses and they've told us this is something they're seeing on a day-to-day basis. So that's all the kind of preamble, but what can we practically do about it? I think there's a few key strategic choices that we need to make in this country. We need to, first of all, prioritise this sector, the industrial infrastructure sector, because it is an enabler to the rest of the economy. Just focusing on science or life sciences, etc., in isolation, it's important we have strategies and plans in those areas. we also need a broader industrial infrastructure approach as well, because, you know, our life sciences, for example, is pharmaceuticals, which James mentioned, you know, if we don't have the facilities to transport the products they're generating, they're not going to be made here, they're going to be made somewhere else. So we need to make sure we get that linkage across policymakers at a senior level. We also think in terms of the sort of the planning system as well, we do need the government to be more interventionist. You know, we have seen the chaos, I think, over the past decade when it comes to the planning system and the lack of space and land being allocated for strategically significant products. And that does mean there are some challenges for any government. You know, how do we balance local consent and engagement, but also getting the national infrastructure we need? And we think, and we advocate in our report, tightening some of the national planning framework prioritisation, so it makes very clear that, you know, provided you can meet certain criteria, that industrial infrastructure should be given the go-ahead, and it should be on responsibility of local actors to prove why that would have a damaging impact rather than the other way round. In terms of power, I mean, it's crazy to think about it, but we actually do not prioritise not just this sector, but any sector when it comes to allocation of power. So it's a first come, first served basis currently. So, you know, if I want to set up, you know, a go-karting track and you want to build a new industrial factory for high-tech manufacturing, but I get there 10 minutes before you, I get the power before you get it. Now, is that really the kind of decision making we want to see in this country? I don't think so. National Grid is looking at reviewing the system, but it's still effectively saying that it's not going to make decisions between different sectors. It's going to look at ways to quicken the process. It's going to look at ways to streamline the process. But actually, I think we do need to make some tough choices. And the last one, I guess, which I think is really important, is I think, you know, devolution and letting local control of decision making is a really important part of all governments going forward. I think we do want to see economic power and economic development concentrated more within local authorities and within theirs. But that doesn't mean the centre has to fragment itself. And I think that, you know, look at countries around the world, the United States or Japan, when it comes to major infrastructure projects and industry, they have one-stop shops effectively to deliver on that. And in the UK, we have a very fragmented system. You know, we have the Major Products Authority at the Cabinet Office doing some advisory work. We have a National Infrastructure Commission. We have a UK Infrastructure Bank. We have all these different kind of policy levers. And what we're recommending in this report is to bring them together into a national industrial infrastructure development agency, which could combine all these functions from both advising government on what infrastructure we need, towards identifying the financing needs for that, looking at the planning requirements, and also looking at delivery as well. So we concentrate that thinking power within the centre and delivery power within the centre, so that it can be an effective partner to local authorities and to combined authorities all going forward. So that's all our recommendations, but, you know, really interested to see what Sarah and Bill, and also, you know, thank you for the direction, James, and the feedback you've given us in this research. It's been really valuable. So thank you.
Cool. Sarah, that's all right.
Yes.
Reflections
Thank
on what you've
you.
heard
Yes.
and perhaps from a
I'm
Labour perspective
trying not
as
to
well.
slide off these.
If
If we're ever lucky enough to form a government, I think we should legislate
That's
against
the idea.
this kind of chair.
Comfortable chairs,
I'm not, I
please,
don't know
yes.
whether I'm up or down.
I think that's the business to come, actually. On your desk.
First job for me. Really good to be here. It's only Tuesday and it's been quite a dramatic week already in terms of politics. We had a massive vote yesterday, a win for Labour on in terms of the what's it called, the contaminated blood situation, and that was absolutely brilliant and very exciting. And today we've had the Home Secretary in Kigali desperate to try and get this flight to go to Rwanda, and you would think perhaps they're not focusing on the key issues of the day. So while we have everybody in a cost of living crisis, we have business telling us, gosh, we can't pull the right levers we need to pull to invest in this country, we can't grow, we can't connect, we can't do all of these things. We have a government that seemingly is obsessed with flying a few people over to Rwanda. So it's good to be here, and it's good to have a proper conversation and a proper debate. I want to just start by challenging one of the premises of your report, which was, as you do if you're a history student, was challenge the starting point. But it's a really good report, really good recommendations, and I think I agree with virtually everything, apart from the concept that that politicians have been ignoring this problem, because we are not ignoring this problem. The Labour Party is very much focused on these problems, and my job is proof of that. So my role, I'm the Shadow Minister for Industry and Decarbonisation, It's a new role, it's a joint role between the Department of Business and the Department of Energy and Net Zero. And that's a deliberate appointment because we cannot grab the opportunities that net zero brings without thinking about jobs, and we're not going to deliver the jobs of the future without harnessing the opportunities of net zero. So it is one of the many signs, I would hope, that the Labour Party is very serious about this agenda, very serious about infrastructure, very serious about reindustrialising our country in a way that works for people. So really pleased to be here. I'll just tell you a couple of people that I've met in literally the last couple of weeks. I've been in this role 3 months, met hundreds probably by now of businesses, but some of the problems, just to bring them to life a bit. So I met a man who runs a company where he wants to put batteries into motorway service stations. Is just one of the many things he does to support the infrastructure for the electric cars. He's trying to do that at the moment in 10 different service stations. He has to apply to 10 different local authorities, the planning permission. That seems to me to be very complicated. I met a woman who runs a company that makes helicopters. She was saying they need 3,000 engineers just to deliver on the books that they've got now, and they have capacity to expand. Our engineers are going down in this country, where actually it's one of the problem cases in terms of migration into this country. The visas for engineers is soaring because they're going down in the UK, so she can't do what she wants to do. Met another man who makes yachts. He was saying he could double, treble the production that he has, but he doesn't have the supply chain. It's just not there in this country. And then I saw a group of private equity firms last week who were all wanting to invest, all having the money to invest, looking where am I going to invest around the world. They look exactly to your point to the UK, and they say, well, the grid connections are rubbish, the energy is really high, this is not necessarily going to work for us. So the Labour Party is really serious about tackling these problems, and as I see it, there are some fundamentals that we have to get right. The first is we have to create certainty and we have to create stability, and that is what has been missing for a very long time. So of course that means Rachel Reeves with the iron grip on the public purse and her fiscal rules, and of course it means things like the Office of Value for Money, giving more, putting in more assurances that we can't have a crash like we saw last year. But it also means things like an industrial strategy, so a real plan that people understand, that people can engage with, that people can be part of, and that people can work around, and that can join up all of the disparate challenges that you so eloquently highlighted that we need to deliver. So the first thing is we need that stability and a plan. The second thing is we need a real partnership with the private sector and industry and business, because we can't do this on our own. It's all very well us saying we're going to create thousands of jobs. Well, we're not actually. It's going to be the private sector. So how do we work together really effectively? And underneath the industrial strategy, there will be a kind of beefed up kind of industrial council, which is on a statutory footing, which will have real influence and power when it comes to how we design, co-create the industrial strategy that we want to see in the future. So having a real partnership with business is an absolute key. And then thirdly, in terms of the plan and being serious about this, Labour already has, and I can't go through them all tonight, I mean I could, but we can hear that Labour has a huge amount of policy in this area, and I would really encourage people to look at it because it's very comprehensive and it speaks to a lot of your recommendations that you had in your report. So whether it's the Green Prosperity Plan, which is the 28 billion that we're going to invest to make sure we are going to be a clean energy superpower of the world, whether it's the funding that sits beneath that, which I'll go into briefly because I think people probably don't yet know about it, but one of the things we're going to do is set up a national wealth fund. This is part of the same Green Prosperity Plan. The National Wealth Fund is £8 billion of investment in our gigafactories, in ports, in renewable, in all kinds of infrastructure that we will need to deliver what we want to see in the future. So that will be very important. And Rachel Reeves has been really clear about that. Yes, that's a lot of money. Yes, that's a lot of investment, but we want to crowd in private sector investment with that. So for every £1 that we spend through that fund, we want £3 from the private sector. So that is the model that we want to be going for, and that's the National Wealth Fund. Great British Energy, where we're going to be creating energy owned in the UK, but also from on a large scale and down to a small scale in terms of all the different renewable energies that we know we need to see to meet net zero. That's a really important part of our plans. Our planning reforms, I think, speak very clearly to what you were talking about. So absolutely, we need much stronger planning structures. We're going to redefine the national frameworks, but also make sure that there are priorities given for the infrastructure that we need. And we need to do that with people, because we know that's hard. So making sure we are, where we can, taking people with us. If we want you to have infrastructure for energy in your area, then you should get cheaper energy bills. That's only fair. So we need to do this in partnership with people. We also have a raft of plans around the national grid, using our kind of bargaining power to buy the infrastructure that we need, and also looking at how it's prioritised. The government has already said they're doing some kind of cleaning up of the list, because there are people who sit on the list just speculatively. We need to do something about that, but we need to be clear what our priorities are. But without an industrial strategy, who knows what your priorities are? So you have to have the plan in order to deliver on that strategy. And then skills, of course, that we haven't mentioned, but is incredibly important to all of this agenda. So we're going to set up Skills England, which will work with the Migration Advisory Council, will work with all of the different areas to have a proper skills plan. And then we want to see reform in our FE sector, so that we really do grasp the connections with local businesses, so we understand the skills mix that we have in an area and understand what's needed. And that's where devolution is important, but you can't have one without the other. You need the strategy, and then you can devolve the power. So I've probably talked enough already. There was one quote from your report, which is very good, but I just wanted to read, because I also found issue with it. Where was it? Where was it? It said, right, it said, the government has a vision to make Britain a science and technology superpower by 2030. Labour has put maintaining the country at the technological frontier and diffusing technology at the core of its industrial strategy. Unfortunately, there is no plan to turn this from rhetoric to reality. Well, there is a plan, and it's called a general election.
Great. Well, Ben, thank you very much. I'll resist the temptation to say I agree with Sarah, and I therefore don't need to do any more now. But look, I'll focus on transport and roads, but more than roads, because you can't do roads without rail or public transport or active travel. If you're being honest, if you want to free up road space, you've got to look at integrated transport. One of my early experiences was Rishi Sunak cancelling the Northern leg of HS2, which actually was a project to reduce the number of lorry movements on our roads by 500,000 a year, which was about integrated transport and all the things we've all been talking about. And we had a consensus on that policy, and just like we did with net zero, it was very, very disappointing to see both those policies being in one case completely shelved, in the other case not quite sure what he's done with it, because it's sort of kind of a hokey-cokey policy with net zero, isn't it? 1 minute we're just having the zero emission vehicle mandate go through, contradicted by him delaying the end of the sale of new petrol and diesel cars from 2030 to 2035. And if you look at the Times today, there's a report showing the impact, which is a 17% decline in sales of new electric vehicles in November. Consumer confidence has really taken a hit. Meanwhile, manufacturers have been left with the mandate, but they've got to produce increased volumes of electric cars. It's a very, very difficult situation. But look, that is the incoherence of their policy. And just to go back to HS2, the symbolism of cancelling it in a disused railway station at the end of the line, where most of the benefits accrue, wasn't lost on anybody, and I still scratch my head over it. And there's the Kigali reference coming here. He couldn't stop the boats, so he decided to stop the trains instead. And I think actually yesterday's announcement just confirms that I was probably right in my assessment that was what it was about, because they keep coming back with their rehashed 5-point plans, which don't move us any further forward as a distraction, as Sarah said, to the things that actually matter, that are at the heart of your excellent report. And yes, we do need a change of government to deliver this, and we can't deliver anything in opposition. All we can do is talk about it. So So I suppose at one level that's a fair criticism, but there isn't doing anything about it because we're only talking. But we do have very ambitious plans. We have very well crafted plans. All the reasons Sarah set out, but especially because they follow the evidence. They follow the evidence from industry. They are a partnership. James, you used that word. Sarah used that word. It's so important that we get to know each other, that we get to know who is presenting the right evidence, and we get to know who's going to work with us to make sure that Sarah and I in our different jobs in government are best placed to implement policies effectively. That's why the partnership approach matters. But there's a further point around how we're going to do things. We have 5 missions. Number 1 mission is sustain the highest growth in the G7. Arguably number 2, probably number 2 for us actually, is the clean energy mission, which is self-sufficiency in generational renewable electricity with the cheaper bills, the jobs, the energy security that it delivers. But one of the reasons I mention missions is because they're cross-departmental. They are inherently about partnership in government between the two, not just our two departments, Treasury and Environment, and actually all government departments one way or another on those missions. But across society, that partnership with the private sector, the partnership with the workforce, the partnership with the community sector down the country, and it is that approach that will, if anything can, really break the logjam in how things happen in this country and transform our prospects. So we have some really significant challenges. James, you made this point about how fundamental logistics and the business that you're in, or the businesses that you're in, are to the success of the economy. I completely agree. If we are going to transform our prospects, how we address infrastructure is critical. In my brief, how we move goods is critical. How we modernise that generally, freeing up the road space, I say. How we deliver the additional electricity that we want to generate, and that we believe we can. The science says we can. I'm sure it's possible. How we deliver that through networks across our major routes, and ensuring that it is available at the depots that are critical, not just for electric cars and last mile deliveries with vans, but how do we decarbonise, how do we achieve the £100 billion price tag that is set for the decarbonisation of heavy goods vehicles on our roads? A really, really serious challenge, but one that we must meet. It's 90% of road emissions, 1% of road movements. Absolutely essential for multiple reasons. And all of these things are technologically possible, and all of these things in this country are exciting opportunities as well. And I think, as well as facing really significant challenges, we have a huge set of opportunities, because we can create jobs, we can deliver cheaper bills, we can generate economic growth, and we can play our part, our leading part, in decarbonising what goes on in our economy. Because much of that technology is developed in this country. Much of the best examples are here. We have some really good geographical and geological advantages with it being windy here. We've still got good solar prospects. We've got, in my part of the world, the potential, very, very exciting potential for tidal, which has been shown to be commercially achievable in Korea. And the Liverpool City region is working with the Korean operators to see how we can translate what goes on there to the northwest of England, north of Wales, and southwest Scotland for starters. We have very encouraging prospects with hydrogen and of course carbon capture, and we have the places to store the carbon capture in our underground caverns in a way that very few other countries have, and we have a thriving nuclear industry too. So we are really well placed, and that's just energy and its relationship to transport. So many other technologies too. Sarah described a few businesses that you know. So I am optimistic that we will take advantage of these opportunities. But we do need to change the way that we go about things in this country. So if I look specifically at roads, yes, it is about decarbonising, but it's also about being realistic about the kind of investment we make in our road system. The government has halved the spending on road maintenance since 2016. It's no wonder that the pothole backlog is now £14 billion in 11 years worth. And I'm afraid that Rishi Sunak's 8.3 billion he's transferred from HS2, if indeed it really is transferred, because it wasn't really going to happen anyway, the sounds they've been making for some time. That's only 2% of the backlog, and will take 11 years to clear. So we need to be far more ambitious. We need to support local authorities to be able to deliver the agenda on local roads, and we've been talking about planning. We need to beef up planning departments, not just so that road schemes can go ahead, but so that all the infrastructure improvements can happen too. Supporting local government is a key element, whether it's roads or elsewhere. And so there is much to do. When we come in, we will be reviewing what went wrong with HS2. We will be reviewing major capital projects, including in roads and transport more widely. But fundamentally, what we've got to do is look at the evidence base. What we've got to do is work with industry, and what we've got to do is really be ready for a change of government, for a change in our scale of ambition, and to take advantage of the opportunities available to us. And thank you very much for your contributions this evening. Please keep in touch.
Thank you. So we've got about 20 minutes left for questions. We're going to go 5 minutes. Cool. Get ready with your hands, but just before then, James, I'm going to just ask you a quick question before we open it up to the floor. Was there a particular recommendation you wanted to sort of highlight the government, any future Labour government should be thinking about from the report?
Yeah, no, I'd probably do the classic answer, which is pick on two actually. Firstly, it's around planning. There's two aspects of planning itself. I think it's the presumption in favour of industrial within the NPPF. And I think the key point for us is it's not industrial over and above everything else. It's this balance. The fact that if you build housing, we know that you need more infrastructure to support the housing. Turley's commissioned a great report which said that for every house you build, you need 69 square feet of industrial floor space, and that makes a lot of sense. The numbers feel right and real. So that's a really key point. And then the other point, which I think is not a straightforward win, but is just around investment in the planning departments. Planning is now incredibly challenging, for us and for our customer base. And we talk about certainty, and ultimately businesses want certainty, and a great way to do that is to give certainty through planning. That's both the time taken to get planning applications through, it's the amount of effort it takes to pull together a planning application. And we're not in any way you need to have rigour around planning applications, but there are certain things that can be standardised, templated, picked up at a national level, then delved into more detail locally. But I think the fact that, for example, you only have 40% of local authorities with a current local plan is a problem. You have a void at a national level after the abolition of regional spatial strategies. So again, this more national, more zonal approach is really, really important. So investment in planning is key. I mean, I'm also just going to pick up energy as well, because we see that as critical, because for certainty for businesses, this is the point around they want resilience of energy supply, they want affordable energy supply, and they want a future capacity of energy supply. And the challenge isn't around generation as far as we see it for the UK, it's about getting energy to where it needs to go within the UK. And energy is more complex now, because it's not about putting it one way, it's about also taking it back the other way as well. So, exporting into the grid is really difficult. And obviously we can put solar PV on our roofs, but actually getting export into the grid is really, really challenging. And we've done a bit of work. London is a global city, and to get power to where it needs to be in London requires more primary substations around the capital. That requires land and investment in the grid to make that happen. And I have to tell you, that's going to be a real challenge, and something I think that the new Labour government would need to consider hard around actually getting the power to where it needs to be in the UK. So those two things.
Thank you, James. So questions from the floor, please raise your hand now if you would like to ask a question of our panelists. Gosh,
Stand in silence.
very shy. So, yeah.
I mean, can I just pick up on
Yeah,
that
you can,
point
yeah.
that James was making about planning? And I think it's a fascinating one about resourcing that. I mean, when we were doing this report actually, so it started, the government was doing a consultation to say, well, we're going to ring fence money from the planning system to go into planning departments. And they rejected that. So in the autumn statement they came out and said, well, you can pay a premium to get your planning application through, but it's not guaranteed that money's going to go back into the planning system either. And I think there's something about the strategic role of planning in central and local government, I think, which is really important, and which I think that we policymakers here in kind of Whitehall and Westminster have taken for granted, I think, too long. We just assume it's kind of, you just write a document out here and it's going to get implemented out. But actually, you know, what we need to do is make sure that there is the resourcing there for that, for the kind of the interaction, the interface between business, the planning system and government when it comes to the funding strategic projects. And I think certainly my colleague Dan Goss, who I wrote the report with, you know, when you're trying to find data on actually how long it takes to get a planning application to a system, there is no central held data on there, or if it is, it's very patchy and very contradictory. I think it just shows you that kind of taking for granted this wider problem that we've had. But I'm really pleased to see that Labour is taking the planning issue quite seriously. But I think, you know, nothing is free ultimately. You know, the language government is priorities and spending as well. And I think definitely, as James said, you know, one of the things that we struggled with doing this report was that kind of investment in the planning system was really important.
Well, Rachel Reid said at conference that we would recruit, or we would fund 300 additional planners from the stamp duty surcharge on overseas buyers, so that's where we're getting the funding for that. And I mean, that, you know, is not the answer to anything. 300 is what, one per local authority, but at least it's some investment in the right area and making sure councils, you know, do have their local plans and making sure that's mandated so that they can't just not have one. I think is absolutely key, and then getting the balance right that we touched on before this about how the national plan then fits with a devolved structure and what that means for the regions and for the local area, because the point about London is a regional problem, so it needs to be solved in a regional way, but each local authority also needs to be able to have agency over what they're creating.
Yeah, can I just ask Bill, it's all very inspiring and interesting and inspirational and everything, but kind of where does the money come from? Because Rishi Sunak cutting 8 billion from roads is because we're told there's no money. Sarah, thank you for the insight on how you might fund planning improvements, but we're not flush, are we? So you know, even though this is a great vision, where do we find the money for all these important things?
Yeah, well, in the 30 seconds left, I mean, look, we have to grow the economy. I mean, Sarah's already pointed out that we're looking for private sector money to be crowded in to match fund the private sector, the public sector money that we're going to borrow. We have to borrow to invest. But let's look at the choice here, because we had 1.5% growth since 2013. The last Labour government had 2%. The OECD average in the last 13 years has been 2.1%. If we'd matched that OECD average or our last Labour government average, the growth would have meant a GDP of 150 billion or more a year, and 40 billion extra in tax revenues as a result. So this is why growth is so important. And you know, so there is not a quick fix here. We have identified some pots of money, and Sarah's just given you a really good example of it. Every pound we allocate is going to be costed for precisely the reasons that you just set out. We do need to borrow to invest long term. That's what the Sovereign Wealth Fund will do. It's what the Green Prosperity Fund will do. But very much on the basis of sound money, of stability in the economy, learning the lessons kind of already repeating the mistakes of this trust and quasi-quasi and spooky markets. And by having that sound money approach, we are confident that there will be greater confidence from investors, and ultimately it has to be that long-term approach. It's what other countries are doing, and in a world where there is borrowing to invest long-term, it has to be the way we do it.
Yeah, thank you.
And I mean, just to add to that, it's not that the government doesn't spend money now, they spend it badly. And they just, you know, put 500 million to Tata Steel in Port Talbot, and 3,000 people are going to lose their job as a result. And but equally, there's no conditions on that money. There's no, you know, there's no benefit. There's no kind of, this is going to help you know, the local, it's just a pot of money that they've had to give. I mean, it's, you know, they had to provide some support because Tata were getting to the point where they were going to give up and go, and that's what's happened time and again, that we get to a point where things have got to crisis point and the government intervenes and they end up having to spend more money than they should have done in the first place because they haven't supported and done the right things in the run-up. So, I mean, if you just look at the COVID fraud, or, you know, there's multiple ways this government, or £7 million a day on hotels, whereas if they just spent a bit more money and sorted out the backlog, you wouldn't be spending all this money on hotels for asylum seekers. There are multiple wasted millions, billions on this government's watch, and you know, that is one thing that you can't argue with about Rachel Reeves, is she will be very careful about that, and every single bit of money that we are allocating has either been identified in terms of the tax system, whether it's non-doms into the public sector or whether it's the 15% VAT on private schools, whatever it might be. The funding that we've allocated to public sector funding is there. We know where that money is coming from. But the Green Prosperity Plan is borrowing, but it's borrowing with a purpose, it's borrowing with a plan, and we hope to crowd in a lot more private sector funding.
Okay,
But you're right, it's a difficult climate we're going to be finding ourselves in.
Yeah.
There's no quick fix, right?
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
We have to go and vote.
Yes, you do have to go and vote.
Hey, Greg, so thank you very much to our
So just coming back into your point there about the process, I mean, this is one of the other things we put in the report around tax policy as well. So there's been a huge amount of stuff about the super deduction, for example, which has been put in place. Now, I'm a big fan of super deduction. I think it is a good idea. I think it's a good policy. But you know, when we're looking into this research, actually, when it looks at buildings and kind of capital, we still haven't got a tax system really incentivise investment in that. And you know, the allowances that we've created for that, they're far longer term. So in Germany, for example, they're depreciating over a much shorter rate of time than we are. So if you're in an investment zone at the moment, you can get your kind of money back, as it were, claim all your money back on an investment on building and machinery and plant over a 10-year cycle. But for the rest of the country, it's 33 years. Well, the whole country needs to be an investment zone, really. We can't just pick, you know, 20 or 30 small targeted areas. Like the whole of the UK will need to be transformed from everything you said, James, from, you know, building some electrical substations in particular areas, building new warehousing space, building new data centres, etc. So I think we need to think a little bit more expansively as well. And the thing about those tax reliefs is, if you design them right, you know, you're leveraging in that additional private sector investment over the longer term, will pay back itself over time through new job creation, new tax revenues, and so on. So I think there's still a bit of work to be done on the tax system as well. But you know, tax reform, tax cuts, and they won't achieve anything. They also need to look at planning and everything else to make sure these projects can take off. So yeah, I thought they took a bit of an easy way out with the growth one, but you know, there are some policies, obviously in this report and other things that we've been talking about today, which can definitely help to achieve those targets. Great. Polly?
James, also, it's been really fascinating to hear all of this and the fellow ministers' reactions. I wanted to kind of get your sense of whether this is a kind of, in political terms, a kind of Cinderella sector that isn't given the attention it deserves. I think that's what we really found in the report, and we're really trying to kind of shine a light on and get the political focus on it. But what's been your experience on that? And then Andrew, I was interested, just reflecting what Sarah Jones was saying about some of their plans around growth, and specifically the industry council. I was wondering whether there's some supplementary work we could do to push for a role for infrastructure on that council, and that being an opportunity to, if we don't get the whole kind of focus, where can we kind of seed it in the current thinking?
Yeah. Well, I think to us, I mean, this has definitely been a sector that has seen growth and continues to see growth. I think it's incumbent on both, I think, policymakers, but also the sector to talk about the sector. And that point around actually getting policymakers around to understand the sector better is really important. I think from our perspective, day to day, we're out there, we're talking to customers and across the group. And to other people, these are anonymous buildings, because actually, if you think about it from a public perspective, public interact with other asset classes in a different way. They interact with offices, they interact with retail, they interact with, obviously, homes. But industrial is not something unless you work in those buildings or you have a sort of day-to-day interaction for another reason, you don't interact with it, so it is less well known. But what I can tell you is that if you take an anonymous group of buildings, you know, we may own or a competitor may own, the stories that sit behind each of those buildings are genuinely extraordinary, and that's the bit that gets us really excited in our industry, because it's not just a collection of 10 buildings. The trading estate is not just a collection of 400 buildings. It's a collection of 350 customers, all doing very different things. And you know, at the end of the day, when we sort of say, is it the Cinderella sector? Of course, there are bits that are growing, there are bits that, you know, there are bits that are contracting. It varies, but ultimately, the beauty of it is we're creating a space that can be used in a number of different ways. We want to build generic buildings that could be occupied by all those different types of sectors, and we've seen that, right? Netflix occupying industrial buildings to create online, content for streaming. That's extraordinary, and you know, just shows that this isn't just happening in Hollywood. So, I think there is a point of awareness that I think policymakers need to get to know this sector better, really get to understand what happens in it. And I think the point of what we're doing here, and the point of what we need to do as an industry, is to just shout a little bit louder about what's going on and why it's important. And I think that hopefully, you know, today is a bit of a sort of start of doing that a little bit more.
And I would say as well, I mean, this is our occupational hazard, isn't it, Ben? But trying to get, you know, one shadow minister to talk about an event is difficult enough. To get two to come and talk about a report is pretty exceptional. And I think that just demonstrates there is an awareness, not just within Labour, but I think within all parties, that actually if we want to kind of get that high level growth, it's all about growth, it's all they're writing about, it's all they're talking about. You are absolutely critical to that, because I think you made the best point of the evening at the beginning, James, which is this is an enabler. And actually, if you want to make transformational change at a policy level, it's about sorting those enablers out that gets you the biggest bang for your buck. You know, we like sometimes to compartmentalise into specifics, but actually, the sectors we're talking about here, the industrial infrastructure, is like a general purpose infrastructure, which you say can do everything from, you know, backing our creative industries to life science and everything else. And I think the fact that we had the Shadow Roads Minister and the Shadow Business and Decarbonisation Minister here demonstrates they get that key interaction. We just got to keep building on that. It's a really good point, Polly, about the National Infrastructure Council. It's the historian in me just keeps thinking about the National Economic Development Council, which the UK had in the 60s and 70s, and yeah, with mixed results, shall we say. I think there's definitely more work to be done about what this partnership between business and government can look like, and that's something we're really actively thinking about at Demos, because I think if you get any Labour politician up here, from, you know, Keir Starmer right down to kind of newly elected backbencher, they will say to you, we want a partnership with business. And I think get the Prime Minister in and the Conservative backbencher, and they'll tell you exactly the same thing. But we haven't cracked in this country the ability to develop that partnership. And I think it's partly because of issues around awareness, I think. You know, how do we get more interactions between policymakers and business? And I think things like the National Infrastructure Council definitely help with that. But it's also, how do we create that sense of kind of a shared responsibility to take action in this area? So I think, you know, to be honest, when the UK has tried to implement major policy changes, like for example, we significantly cut corporation tax between 2012 and 2018. And the idea was, and I remember being in Parliament at the time, you know, it was the March of the Makers, and we were going to, you know, rebuild the UK's manufacturing kind of status. And we just didn't see the investment coming through into that. And I think that's because business didn't really see the connection between these corporation tax cuts and the responsibility to then follow it up with investment in particular areas. So I think we need to look at how to create much greater sense of collaboration between those two partners. And I think what I found really, you know, optimistically in the work of doing this piece of work with yourselves and your clients was that, you know, when you get business in the room, they're very optimistic about the UK, actually. I mean, our research did show that, you know, and I think this is a worry for people like Bill and for Sarah, is that, you know, a third of businesses are concerned about the UK's future competitiveness. Like, we shouldn't take for granted the UK will always be a major economic power unless we get some of these policies right. But when you get them in the room and actually start talking about the products and the services, they're very excited about the potential for it. And so I do think we can create, you know, using some of the policy recommendations from this research, building some of what Labour's announced, some of what the government's announced, and things like Superpower. If we get that package right, I'm quite optimistic. But there is definitely more work to be done around how do we make that partnership a reality and make it a real partnership, not just a kind of a paper partnership.
Cool. We've got about 4 minutes left, so maybe a few questions if anyone is brave enough to raise their hands. Any questions?
Well, I think there's
Oh,
There's one expert here, I can see.
Great, thank
Bart
you.
van Aert, Productivity Institute. I hear a lot about decarbonization, which I think is a very important element of the industry. The other part is digital, and it's particularly a combination of the two. And I think in your industry, obviously in the new buildings that you're putting there, there's a great opportunity to decarbonize and use digital in a very good way, to twin transition. The problem is with those many older buildings that need to be retrofitted, that need to be reconverted. So what's your strategy there? Because I think it's well, you have the planning issues, but it's relatively easy to talk about all the new shiny stuff. The problem is that this country, and any country, is full of all these older buildings, which are the real problem. So I wonder what your thoughts around the sort of twin transition element around converting the whole sector.
No, it's a good point, and I think that, I mean, the first thing I'd say is you can do amazing things with back-to-frame refurbs, and we're sort of proving that sort of time and time again in terms of some of the work that we're doing. So actually you can get a lot of the benefits of a new build through, let's say, a really comprehensive back-to-frame refurb, and incorporate all the sustainability features that you put into a modern building. Of course, that's not always possible, but again, the other piece there is if you do that, your embodied carbon is obviously less than if you actually create a brand new building from scratch. So I think there's an awful lot you can do there. I mean, we're in a fortunate place where as a portfolio we have a modern modern warehouse portfolio, so it is less of an issue for us. But at the end of the day, we're constantly looking at that, sort of that piece around kind of refurbishing and ensuring our portfolio is fit for purpose for the future. But also there's obviously the MEES regulation piece as well, which is coming at us in terms of EPC standards for 27 and 30. So we want to be not only ahead of that and compliant with that, we want to exceed that where we can. So it's not a straightforward one, but I do think a lot can be done through very high quality refurbishments.
I do think as well there is a slight interaction between the new and the old as well. I mean, certainly the conversations we were having with businesses around this research, the fact that it's difficult to get planning permission for new buildings makes me question whether the UK really is interested in developing those sectors going forward. And if you're an international business and you're thinking, where am I going to put my new facilities, you want to look to those countries where you feel it has the most kind of actively supportive environment to do that. And therefore, if you've kind of got older stock in this country and you're thinking, right, should I bring time to retrofit that? But by the way, they're not really allowing new stock to go through. Is this going to be an expanding market in the future? That does create some challenges. I also think that's where the tax release issue comes in as well, actually. I do think we are at risk of developing this really kind of quite contradictory system, really, when it comes to tax, where we're sort of, on the one hand, trumpeting the world about how great it is to invest in the UK, and we have the super deduction elements of that. But on the other hand, as I mentioned, with kind of buildings and facilities allowances that we have, they're not very generous at all. And I think that creates a little bit of a confusion for businesses when they're planning going forward. So I think using tax relief to kind of leverage the investment in existing infrastructure is really important. And I guess the final other element as well is, looking at that kind of long-term demand as well. And fundamentally, one of the challenges, and I think Bill summed up quite well, is that when you have got a slow growth economy, there isn't a huge incentive on businesses to kind of innovate and to adapt, because market share can't expand particularly, revenue increase is not particularly easy to have. So we do need to get some of those economic fundamentals right as well. I think what we can see, though, I think for the first time, certainly I can remember working in these policy areas, is ministers actually wanted to talk about these kind of issues actually, and really wanted to engage with them. So I'm hopeful that we can kind of continue this conversation forward, and I'm sure the Productivity Institute will be helpful in making the case for some of that as well.
Before we close, James, is there anything you wanted to conclude with, any final remarks before we drink some warm white wine?
No, just to say, really welcome the opportunity to talk about our sector. Again, we've obviously touched on there are a number of challenges, but again, hopefully with the right approach and the right policies, there are things to be positive about from a UK standpoint. As I talked about, whether it's life sciences, AI, we're in a good place. We are an innovator nation, but let's not miss that opportunity for that next phase that we're going to go through, because it feels like we are on the cusp of quite a lot of change from a technological standpoint, and I think we want to ensure that we can grasp that.
Cool. Well, thank you, James. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you all for your great questions. Round of applause for our panelists.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually. Do you have copies of the report here? No, it's today, but we'll send you one. Chopper, yeah. So we've set up